My famous person speech is about Winston Churchill, who's often known as the wartime prime minister. Winston Churchill was Britain's prime minister for most of World War II. He was famous for his speeches and for his refusal to give in, even when things were going badly. For a time, he was the most famous person in Britain. People all over the world know the name Winston Churchill. Churchill was born in 1874, lived through two world wars, saw the first cars, the first planes, and the first astronauts in space. He was also at the crowning of Elizabeth II as Queen in 1953 and was an MP for over 60 years. Eventually, Winston Churchill died in 1965. Winston was born on the 30th of November in 1874 in Blenheim Palace near Oxford. Blenheim is a great house built in the 1700s for John Churchill, who was Winston's ancestor. He was Duke of Marlborough and a famous soldier. Winston's mother was there visiting Blenheim when her baby was born. The baby was named Winston Spencer Churchill. His mother was Jeannie Jerome, an American, and his father, Lord Randolph Churchill, an important person in the government at that point in time. Winston had a younger brother, Jack, and a nurse looked after the two boys because their mother and father were often very busy and away from home. In 1893, Winston went to the Army College at Sandhurst. He wanted to be a soldier in the cavalry. 1895 was a sad year. His father and his nurse died. Winston went to America and Cuba and started writing for newspapers about his adventures. In 1896, Churchill was sent to India, which was then part of the British Empire. Winston knew many important people and asked the Prime Minister to help him fight in a war in the Sudan and Africa. In 1898, he rode with the cavalry at the Battle of Omdurman. Next, he went as a newspaper reporter to South Africa. There, the British Army was fighting the Boers. Winston was captured by the Boers, but escaped. He climbed out of a window and hid on a train. He came home a hero. In 1900, he was elected as an MP. In 1908, Winston married Clementine Hosier. Soon, Winston was in the government. By 1910, he was Home Secretary. In 1911, he took charge of the Royal Navy. At this time, Britain had the world's largest navy. In 1914, World War I began. Churchill wanted the Navy to win battles, but in 1915 his plan for an attack on Turkey went badly wrong. Many British, Australian, and New Zealand soldiers died. Churchill resigned. He went to fight in France as a soldier, and by 1917 he was back in the government. He was in charge of new weapons and was excited about the new tanks, which eventually helped win the war by 1918. In the 1920s, Churchill bought Chartwell, a house in Kent. He and his wife had 5 children. He wrote books to earn extra money, and in 1924, he was made Chancellor of the Exchequer. He was in charge of the country's money and taxes, but was not a success and left this job in 1929. In the 1930s, Churchill said Britain must get ready for a new war. Germany's leader Adolf Hitler was a danger to peace, but he was not in the government, so people took little notice of his warnings. In 1939, Germany attacked Poland. Britain and France went to war with Germany, and World War II began. Churchill was put in charge of the Navy again, but the war went badly. By 1940, France was beaten. Britain faced invasion. Britain needed a new leader, and in May 1940, Winston Churchill became Prime Minister. Britain still had friends, and the British Empire sent help. People from the Caribbean, Africa, India, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand left home to fight alongside Britain. Churchill used the advantage of radio to tell the world that Britain was not beaten up, and his speeches helped keep up people's spirits. "We shall never surrender," he told Parliament. From 1941, America was in the war. So was Russia. Britain and America were now allies. Churchill became a friend of America's President Roosevelt, and he met Russia's leader Joseph Stalin, and the 3 leaders were called the Big Three. On D-Day, 1944, the Allies landed armies in France. Churchill wanted to go too, but he had to wait until it was safer. The war in Europe ended in May 1945, and crowds cheered Churchill. Stood with the King and Queen. Later, Britain had an election, and the Conservative Party lost. Churchill, who was a conservative, gave up being Prime Minister, and by August 1945, World War II was over. In 1953, Elizabeth II was crowned Queen. Churchill became Sir Winston Churchill and was given the Nobel Prize for Literature for his history books. In 1955, he gave up being Prime Minister, but he was an MP until 1964. Though old and often not well, he still enjoyed painting pictures. Churchill eventually died on the 24th of January 1965. Many world leaders came to his state funeral. Crowds lined the streets. And many famous British people are buried in Westminster Abbey or St. Paul's Cathedral, but Churchill's grave is in a country churchyard near Oxford.